Hey friends! Stained glass windows are fascinating, whether you see them in a medieval church or hanging in someone's home. Stay tuned until the end of this video, and I'll introduce you to a master of the craft that I found here on YouTube. Someday, I may learn how to create stained glass in real life, but for now, I've developed a process to create a stained glass design within Inkscape. Let's take a look at the 3 projects I've selected for this video. By the way, you can download the free Inkscape Stained Glass Project Starter SVG file that we're looking at now if you want to follow along. Just look at the download link in the description if you'd like that. Our first project I'm calling Tulips and Butterfly. It's fairly simple since it has 32 shapes and 10 colors. The next one I'm calling My Favorite Sun. It's a little more complex since it has over 60 shapes and 9 colors this time. The last one, Dolphin at Sea, is also more complex since it has over 40 shapes and also 9 colors. Here are the first few steps of the first project, and you can jump in at any point. I'll use Ctrl-D and align this inspiration piece to my 8.5 by 11 document. I found this simple outline of a stained glass design on Vecteezy. Note that if I check out the fill and stroke characteristics, it has a fill color, but it has no stroke color. So now if I try to use our friend the Shape Builder tool to extract the shapes, it doesn't really work. That's because the outline is not really a stroke as we need it to be. So what I'll do now is group together the stroke line segments that I've already created in the starter file and align them to the page. Let's separate the tracing from the original inspiration file so we can take a closer look at the outlines. I will ungroup them so you can see what they looked like when I finished creating them. I created these tracing lines using the Bezier pen, and you can see that there's no fill color and it's just a stroke with a fuchsia color and a width of 3 pixels. I made a point of overlapping the line segments so that when we use the Shape Builder tool, it'll have no problem picking up the shapes. When I use the Nodes tool on the line that I've selected, you can see that the endpoints have a triangular node, which are corner nodes, and the interior ones have the square nodes, which paradoxically are rounded nodes. When I first drew the line, all the nodes were the corner nodes, so I just select the interior ones with a bounding box, and then I can change them up at the top like this. Okay, we're done with the inspiration piece, so we can let that go. Let's select all of the outlines now together, and go ahead and use the Shape Builder tool now to start selecting the shapes. I'll select each shape by clicking it once. And now I'll speed up the video so you can see the rest of this. If you zoom in and find out that there are still some itty-bitty shapes that are not attached to other shapes, you need to drag the cursor from one shape to the next to combine the 2 shapes. Okay, we're done with that. And what we're left with are these shapes with no fill and their original stroke properties. So what I like to do is give them all a lime green fill, a black stroke, and change the width to just 1 pixel. Now I want to set up the border, so I'll use Ctrl-D to duplicate all of this and drag it off to the left. So on my copy on the left, I'll use the red X at the bottom to eliminate the fill. And I'll change the stroke width to something that I think will look good. In this case, I chose 10 pixels. So now I'm back in the starter file to show you the color choices I made. I downloaded a vector butterfly and some flowers, again from Vecteezy, and I borrowed their colors, making my own color swatches for all these different colors. I'll use Ctrl-C to copy and then Ctrl-V to put them up near the page so we can take a look at how to use them. And now I'm going to color each of these pieces. This is where the keyboard shortcuts come in handy. The shortcut for the selector tool is S, and I'm going to use the dropper tool, and the shortcut for that is D. So with the selector tool, I'll select a shape, I'll change over to the dropper tool, go over to the color swatch I want to use and click that. That changes the shape to that color. I immediately switch back to the selector tool, and then I keep on repeating this process to color all the shapes. Let me speed this up a bit, and you can get into a little rhythm using the S and the D keys to get this done. If you happen to do something wrong, just back out of it with Control Z. Now it's time to make the glass panes for our project. Again, I'll use Control C and Control V to bring them closer to the project workspace. So what I do for each color is I use Control D to copy one of the color swatches. I size it to be big enough to contain the pieces for that color. Then I apply this really neat filter under the Filters and then Textures section, and I choose Cracked Glass. This came out to be lighter than I would like, so I go over to the Fill and Stroke menu and look at the fill settings, and I use the HSL option in the drop-down, which has the color wheel, but it also has these H, S, L, and A slider bars. The L slider for lightness is what I can use to drag it a little bit to the left to darken up the color. Now I know it doesn't match the original color, but I'll darken it to a point that I find appealing and go with that. Now I like to have a master glass pane for each color, so what I do is Control D to duplicate this square, move it to the side, and then for each piece, I'll make a new one. So what I do now is Control D on the piece, drag the duplicate up to the glass pane, then I have to use Shift Select on the glass pane that's below it, and then use Set Clip to clip that piece out of the glass pane. Then with the piece still selected, I use Shift Select on the original piece and align it using the last selected option in my alignment tool to the original piece. I like to leave the original colored piece below the glass pane piece just in case there's any gap that shows through. Now let me do the same process for one of the butterfly wings so I can talk about a potential issue that may arise. You may find with a really small piece or one that's vertical or horizontal that when you clip it, you don't get the entire piece as the result. This can happen because we're using a textured shape behind us. So what I do in this case is use Control Z, go back to the original shape and possibly rotate it a little bit and try it again. That usually solves this issue. Okay, I finished all the textured shapes in the background, and now let's group them all together. And now with all the stroke outlines of the copy of the shapes, let's use Path Combine to make them into one unit. The reason I do this is that it maintains the same fill and stroke characteristics of no fill, and the stroke styles are the same. All right, I'm going to spice up this border a little bit by using two different filters. So I'm going to make a duplicate copy with Control D and move it way off to the left a little. Now on the first outline, I'm going to use a filter under the Shadows and Glows section, and it's called Drop Shadow. These are the settings I want to use. In the Blur Color tab, I'm using white, which is the 6 Fs in a row. You can get this by sliding the L slider all the way to the right. In the other tab, I'm using a small value of 0.5 for the blur radius and zeros for the offset values. You can use the live preview checkmark if you want to see the difference, and then go ahead and click the Apply button. If I zoom in, you can see this is a very subtle effect where it applies the white shadow to the inside edge of each of these border lines. Now on the second copy of these borders, this next filter is a little more fun. We'll go to Ridges and Thin Membrane. Oh, that's pretty cool. I'm going to go over to the opacity and reduce that down to about 40%. Now if I zoom out a bit, you can see that this filter made that outline a little larger than I would like it to be, because I want to be able to align things without having the extra size. So let's figure out what to do. I'll go back to the original outline and select it, and up where it shows the width and the height, I'm going to record those values. So now in some open space, I'm going to create a rectangle and set the width and the height to the recorded values. Then I align this rectangle over the border. So I'm going to deselect these so I can show you something. You might wonder how you can use the rectangle to clip the shape below it if you can't select the shape below it. Well, you actually can, and that's why I left the opacity the way it is. So you select the rectangle, and then you would normally use Shift to select what's underneath it. So now you just hold down the Alt key as well and select the shape below it, and now you can see by the dotted lines, you have them both selected. So now we can use Set Clip to get rid of all that extra space that the filter introduced. Now I can use Shift Select for the first outline and align those two guys together. And I'll go ahead and group them together now. I'm zooming in just to make sure the thin membrane part is on top of the other part. Now I'll use Shift Select on the grouped together glass pieces and align the outline to them. I'll group that all together, and we're done with our tulips and butterfly design. Okay, on to Project 2, my favorite sun. This happens to be a ceramic piece I found at a flea market many years ago, and it's been hanging on my wall ever since. Because this is a round piece, I'm going to change the document properties by right-clicking and setting the page to 8.5 by 8.5 inches. I'd also like to show you how I began to make the tracing with line segments and a shape. So I want to go to the Guides tab and make sure that the Show Guides checkbox is checked, Locked Guides is unchecked. I need some guides similar to how we made mandalas in another video, so I'll go to Extensions, Document, Guides Creator. In the pop-up, I'll choose 2 columns and 2 rows. Again, we can look at it with the live preview and then click Apply and Close. You might be able to see the blue dot rotation handles for the guides on the left side and the bottom of the page. So let me turn snapping on, and with the Control keys pressed, I'm going to drag each one to the center of the page. And we're done with snapping, so I'll turn that off. I'll select my inspiration photo and align that to the center of the page. The first thing to do for the tracing is to use the ellipsis tool to make a perfect circle. I can align it to the center of the page, and now I'll just resize it to approximate what it is in the inspiration photo. Now here comes the fun part. I'm going to select the triangular portion and the curved portion of this design and move it over to the page. I'll get it into its approximate position and then group it all together. Let me slide the photo aside so we can better see what's going on now. If I didn't have Path Effects in the tab on the right, I would use Path Effects, and then I'm going to come down and select the Rotate Copies path effect. There are 8 combinations of these triangle and curvy parts, so I'll change the number of copies up to 8. Now all I have to do is use the Nodes tool to take the center of rotation for these copies and drag it into the center of the page. I can turn snapping on to exactly lock it into place in the center. If you've made mandalas with my other video, this is exactly how we do that. Now that we're done, we can lock that into place by using Path, Object to Path. That's a highlight of creating this tracing, and I want to show you the whole thing. Okay, it's time to use the Shape Builder again like we did before. And remember, if you need to combine 2 shapes that it's presenting to you, just click and drag. Otherwise, select the individual shape and let go. Let me speed up the video so we can get through this. Of course, if there are any mistakes made, all we have to do is use Control-Z to undo that and then resume what we're doing. And again, as before, there may be some tiny shapes that we need to attach to a larger shape. So it pays to zoom in and check everything out. Okay, great, that looks good. I'm finished, and like before, I'm going to set the fill to lime green, and I'm going to change the stroke to black and make it 1 pixel wide. And finally, because I was playing with the opacity earlier, I need to bring it back up to 100%. Like before, we'll duplicate everything and move it off to the left so that we can make our borders. I'll use the red X to get rid of the fill on this, and this time I like a pixel width of 6 for the border. Now going back to my starter file, you can see the color choices that I made. I tried to sample colors from the image, which is not always easy because we're dealing with a pixel-based image. So then I colored in the shapes as we did before. I also made the glass panes, and I decided to use colors a little bit brighter than the original colors since I think it looks a lot nicer that way. Here are the glass shapes and the completed outline border using the same techniques we used in Project 1. And here's the final result. I think it looks pretty good. Okay, now we're ready for the highlights of Project 3, Dolphin at Sea. I found this dolphin vector graphic on Vecteezy, and I also found this graphic of waves on Vecteezy, kind of a Japanese format, and also these clouds. I did some rotations and resizing to put them all together into a format that I think would look good on an 8.5 by 11 page in landscape mode. To get the tracing for the clouds, it was just a simple matter of selecting them and adding a stroke to the clouds. Getting a tracing of the waves was a little more complicated, so let me make a duplicate of that and move it up to a free space here and enlarge it. So I ungrouped everything and started eliminating pieces. My final objective was just to have the outline of each wave. But as you can see, the outline of this wave, it has a fill color and it's not really a stroke. So it's the same issue we had with Project 1. And we'll need to make our own tracing. So here's the tracing I made of the waves. And then here are all the tracings put together. And you'll notice I put a diamond background in there as well. Okay, let's select this whole tracing pattern and use the shape builder. If you like putting puzzles together, this is a good one. There are plenty of overlapping pieces, so I will focus first on the ones that are in the foreground and then go ahead and do the rest of the pieces. Once again, zoom in if you have to make sure you've got everything selected the way you want it. And if you need to, use Ctrl-Z to back out of something and then redo it. Okay, so here are the completed shapes after this process, along with the 1 pixel stroke, and then a duplicate of that with a larger stroke, and no fill. Also, these are the initial colors I chose, mostly from the dolphin and the waves. Here are the shapes after I colored them in, and then a few of the glass panes that I made. Okay, this was the step where I filled in each of the shapes with the glass pane cutout, and I kept them pretty bright, since I think that looks good. Here's our outlines with the drop shadow and the thin membrane filters applied to them, and our finished product for Dolphin at Sea. I hope you like it. Okay, those projects were a lot of fun, but I think I wore out the Ctrl-D on my keyboard. I might have to paint them back on. Now, for the master of creating stained glass windows, here's the YouTuber. His name is Jan Jugalinski. He's based out of the UK, and he creates traditionally leaded stained glass windows. And the enjoyable thing about watching him is he makes it look so easy, but I'm sure it's not. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.